Taemin wiped the grease from his hands and stared at the broken hyperdrive sitting on his workbench, knowing he could fix it in his sleep, but also knowing the owner would probably haggle down his already pathetic fee to almost nothing because that was how things worked on asteroid colony K447, where desperate mechanics took whatever scraps they could get just to survive another week and pay down the endless medical debt that hung around his neck, like a chain made of numbers and regret, and the memory of his sister's face in that hospital bed 3 years ago, when the doctors said they had done everything they could, but the bill said otherwise, and now here he was, 34 years old and fixing hyperdrive coils for people who looked at him like he was part of the machinery itself, just another tool to be used and discarded. His communicator buzzed, and Jiwoo's face appeared on the small screen, her eyes bright with that manic energy she always got when she found something interesting on the colony's information network, and she was grinning like she had just discovered a new law of physics, which, knowing her engineering background, was not entirely impossible, but more likely she had found another stupid scheme to waste their non-existent money on, and Taemin was not in the mood. "You need to see this," Jiwoo said, without even saying hello first because she never bothered with greetings when she was excited about something, and Taemin sighed the kind of sigh that came from deep in his chest where all his exhaustion lived. "I am working," he said flatly, but she was already talking over him. "There is an auction at the old Vren compound, and they are selling off abandoned ships from the colony's impound lots, and I am talking ancient stuff from the war era, and most of it is junk, but there is one ship that has no identification markers, and the starting bid is half a credit." She said it all in one breath without pausing, and Taemin felt his eye twitch because half a credit was literally the price of a cup of synthetic coffee, and nothing that flew in space cost half a credit unless it was actually just a floating coffin, waiting to kill whoever was stupid enough to climb inside. "Not interested," he said, but Jiwoo was already shaking her head. "Taemin, listen to me. I ran the auction photos through every database I could access, and this ship does not exist in any registry. Not human, not Vren, not even in the old war archives, and you know what that means." She paused for dramatic effect, and he did not take the bait, so she continued anyway. "It means either someone scrubbed it from every record in existence or it was never supposed to exist in the first place." Taemin looked at his workbench and the broken hyperdrive and the invoice sitting next to it that would pay him maybe enough for 3 days of food if he was lucky, and he thought about his bank account, which currently held exactly 2 credits and 17 cents, and he thought about how Jiwoo was his only real friend in this corner of space and how she had stuck by him even when things got bad after his sister died, and how maybe he owed it to her to at least look at this stupid ship even though it was obviously a waste of time. "Fine," he said, "but when this turns out to be nothing, I'm going to remind you of this moment for the rest of your life." The auction house was in one of the older sections of the asteroid colony, where the walls still showed scorch marks from some long-ago battle, and the air recyclers coughed and wheezed like they were on their last legs, and probably were, because nobody spent money maintaining anything in this part of K447, where only the desperate and the criminal operated, and Taemin was not sure which category he fell into anymore, or if there was even a difference. The room was packed with aliens of every description, tall Vren with their crystalline skin that reflected the harsh lights, squat Haroon traders with their 4 arms gesturing wildly as they calculated profit margins in their heads, even a few other humans, though most of them looked like corporate scouts with their clean uniforms and bored expressions, and Taemin felt very aware of his stained work clothes and the grease still under his fingernails that never quite came out, no matter how hard he scrubbed. Jiwoo grabbed his arm and pulled him toward a viewing window where several ships floated in the vacuum outside the auction house, each one illuminated by spotlights and each one looking more decrepit than the last, with hull breaches and missing panels and engine housings that were just empty holes in the superstructure. "There," Jiwoo pointed, and Taemin followed her finger to a ship that sat apart from the others, smaller than most of the vessels on display but somehow more present, like it occupied more space than its physical dimensions should allow. And the hull was dark. Not the dark of burned metal or carbon scoring, but a deep, light-absorbing darkness that seemed to drink in the spotlights and give nothing back. "That is it," Jiwoo whispered, and Taemin had to admit there was something odd about the ship, something that made his mechanic instincts itch with curiosity, because the lines were all wrong for any design he recognized. Too smooth in some places and too angular in others. Like whoever built it could not decide between organic curves and geometric precision, so they just used both. The auctioneer was a Vren who spoke in the clicking translated language that came through everyone's ear implants. And the bidding started on the first ship, and Taman watched as corporate scouts threw around credits like they were meaningless and bought up the salvageable vessels one by one, until finally the auctioneer came to the dark ship, and his clicking took on what Taman swore was an amused tone. Final lot of the evening. Provenance unknown, system status unknown, hull composition unknown. Starting bid is half a credit, and honestly we are just trying to clear the impound space. So please someone take this heap of metal off our hands. The Vren auctioneer clicked, and several people in the room actually laughed. Jiwoo elbowed Taemin hard in the ribs, and he raised his hand feeling incredibly stupid. Half a credit to the human in the back, the auctioneer said with what definitely sounded like amusement. Any other bids, and the room was silent except for a few more chuckles. Going once, going twice, sold to the desperate human who apparently has more hope than sense. Taemin felt his face burn as he transferred half a credit from his account and received the ship's temporary access codes and ownership documents, and Jiwoo was practically bouncing with excitement as they made their way to the docking tube that would take them to the impound area. This is either the best decision you ever made, or the stupidest, Jiwoo said cheerfully, and I genuinely cannot tell which. The ship was even stranger up close, the dark hull seeming to shift slightly when Taemin was not looking directly at it, and he reached out to touch the surface expecting cold metal, but instead feeling something that was almost warm, almost alive, and his mechanic instincts were screaming that this was not normal, that ships did not feel like this, that metal and composite materials did not have a pulse. The airlock opened with a hiss that sounded like it was breathing, and Taemin and Jiwoo stepped inside, and the lights came on automatically, revealing a corridor that was impossibly clean for a ship that had supposedly been abandoned for who knows how long, and everything was pristine. No dust, no debris, no signs of battle damage or even normal wear and tear. Taemin, Jiwoo said quietly, I am officially scared and excited in equal measure. They moved deeper into the ship and found the bridge, and it was like walking into a dream, or a nightmare. Taemin could not decide which because everything was perfect. Too perfect. Like the ship had been waiting for someone to come back and claim it, and in the center of the bridge was a command chair that seemed to call to him. He sat down without really meaning to, and the moment he touched the armrests, every console in the bridge lit up, and a holographic display materialized in front of him. And then everything went insane because alarms started blaring not from the ship but from the colony itself, and Jiwoo ran to a viewport and screamed, ships. Multiple contacts. They just dropped out of FTL right on top of us. Taemin looked at the holographic display and saw a message written in human standard text, glowing in blue letters that made his blood run cold. Authorization recognized. Welcome, custodian. Humanity's final weapon is now yours to command. Ghost Fleet protocol active, awaiting orders. And then a voice, feminine and calm, spoke from everywhere and nowhere. This unit is designated area. I have been waiting for you. The colony alarms screamed like wounded animals, and Taemin could see through the viewport as 3 massive warships materialized from the darkness of space, their hulls covered in the distinctive crystalline armor of the Vren Dominion, and their weapon ports were already glowing with charging energy. That meant they were not here to negotiate, and Jiwoo was pulling at his arm, trying to get him out of the command chair, but his hands were frozen on the armrests like they had been welded. There, Taemin, we need to go. We need to get off this ship right now. Jiwoo was screaming, but her voice sounded far away because the holographic display in front of him was flooding with information, tactical readouts and threat assessments and weapon systems that should not exist and definitely should not be on a ship he bought for half a credit at a junk auction. Aria's voice came again, still calm despite the fact that death was literally hovering outside ready to vaporize them. Custodian, this vessel has been detected by Vren hunter groups. Recommend immediate departure from current location. Main engine initialization will require 47 seconds, and I can provide cover fire during that window if you authorize weapons release. Taemin found his voice even though it came out as a croak. I am not a custodian. I am a mechanic. I fix hyperdrives and patch hull breaches, and I have no idea how to fly a warship. And definitely no idea how to fight 3 Vren cruisers that look like they could atomize this entire asteroid if they wanted to. Incorrect, Area said with what Taemin swore was a hint of amusement. You are Taemin. Genetic match probability 97%, neural pattern compatible with command interface, authorization level absolute. You are exactly who this ship was waiting for. The first Vren ship fired and the shot went wide, deliberately missing because they wanted the ship intact. They wanted to capture it and study it, and Taemin realized with growing horror that they were not trying to kill him yet, which meant they thought he had something valuable, which meant he was about to become the most hunted human in this sector of space. Jiwoo had stopped pulling at his arm and was now staring at the tactical display with the kind of focused intensity she got when she was solving engineering problems, and she pointed at one of the readouts. Taemin, look at the power output readings on this ship. These numbers do not make sense. This thing has more available energy than a station reactor, and it is all coming from something in the core that the sensors cannot even properly classify, correct? Area confirmed. This vessel utilizes a quantum probability reactor that draws power from fluctuations in reality itself. The technology was developed by Dr. Han Sol during the Ghost Fleet program 200 years ago, and remains the most advanced power system humanity ever created. Taemin felt like reality was tilting sideways because he knew that name. Everyone who grew up on Earth knew that name, even though the history books said Dr. Han Sol had died in the war, along with most of Earth's best scientists, and the Ghost Fleet program was classified at a level that meant even asking about it could get you arrested. The Ghost Fleet does not exist, Taemin said weakly. It is a legend, a story they tell in military academies about the war that almost destroyed humanity. The Ghost Fleet exists, Arya said firmly. You are sitting in one of its vessels, and the Vren know this, which is why they are calling for reinforcements, and in approximately 90 seconds this location will be swarming with hunter ships. The second Vren cruiser fired a warning shot that hit the asteroid colony's outer defense grid, and the shields flared and died because K447 had never invested in proper military protection, and now everyone on the station was going to die because Taemin bought a mysterious ship at an auction. We have to protect the colony, Taemin said, and Jiwoo grabbed his shoulder. We have to get out of here. We cannot fight 3 warships with a vessel we do not even understand. But Taemin was already looking at the weapons display and seeing systems with names like reality phase torpedoes and probability shield matrix and singularity cannon, and his hands moved across the holographic controls like they had done this 1,000 times before, even though he had never touched a weapon system in his life, except for that one time in the human fleet before he got discharged for refusing to follow orders that would have killed civilians. Authorization accepted. Area said, weapons hot, shield matrix deploying. Would you like me to handle combat operations, or do you prefer manual control? You do it, Taemin said quickly, and try not to kill anyone if you can avoid it. Understood. Non-lethal suppression prioritized. The ship moved, and Taemin had not touched any controls, but it moved anyway, sliding out of the impound dock with a grace that ships that size should not possess. And the Vren cruisers immediately locked weapons on them and fired full spreads of plasma bolts that lit up space like a small sun. The shields came up, and the plasma just stopped. Not deflected or absorbed, but stopped, frozen in space like time itself had paused around the ship, and then the bolts simply ceased to exist, snuffed out like candles, and the Vren ships seemed to hesitate because that was not how shields worked. That was not how anything worked. Probability shields engage. Area explained helpfully. By manipulating quantum states, this vessel can make incoming attacks exist in a superposition where they both hit and miss simultaneously. Then we simply collapse the waveform to the reality where they missed. Jiwoo was staring at the display with her mouth open. That is insane. That violates about 17 laws of physics. Incorrect. It utilizes laws of physics that are not commonly known or accepted by mainstream science. Area corrected. The ship accelerated toward the 3 Vren cruisers, and Taemin wanted to scream at Area to turn around and run away. But he found himself trusting the AI's judgment, because something deep in his brain was telling him this was right. This was what the ship was designed for. Weapons fired, but not the kind of weapons Taemin expected. Instead of missiles or energy beams, the ship released what looked like ripples in space itself, and when those ripples touched the Vren cruisers, their shields flickered and died, and their weapon systems went dark and their engines shut down, leaving them floating dead in space. Reality phase torpedoes, Arya said. They do not destroy targets. They simply convince local reality that the target's power systems have already failed. Very useful for non-lethal suppression. You just disabled 3 Vren warships in under 10 seconds. Jiwoo whispered. Affirmative, though I should note that 12 more Vren vessels are arriving in 30 seconds, and these will be dedicated Hunter-class ships with enhanced reality stabilization fields, specifically designed to counter Ghost Fleet technology. Taemin felt his stomach drop. So they were ready for us. They knew ships like this existed, and they have been preparing to fight them. Correct. The Vren Dominion has spent 2 centuries developing countermeasures against Ghost Fleet vessels because they know humanity's greatest weapons were never fully destroyed, merely hidden. The 12 Hunter ships dropped out of FTL in a perfect formation, and their hulls were different from the cruisers, covered in strange geometric patterns that hurt to look at and made Taemin's eyes water. Those patterns are reality stabilization. Matrices, Arya said. They prevent probability manipulation within a certain radius, effectively neutralizing this ship's primary advantage. Recommend immediate tactical withdrawal. Can we outrun them? Taemin asked. Negative. Hunter ships are faster than this vessel in conventional space. However, this ship has access to a quantum slip drive that allows for short-range teleportation through folded space, but using it will drain significant power reserves. The Hunters opened fire, and this time the shields flickered because the reality stabilization fields were working, and the ship shuddered as a plasma bolt partially phased through the defenses and scorched the hull, and Taemin could smell burning metal and melting composites. Do it. Use the slip drive, get us out of here. Taemin ordered. Destination required. Taemin looked at Jiwoo, who was frantically pulling up star charts on a secondary console. There, those coordinates. It is an old nebula that used to be listed in the War Archives as a supply depot location, but it has been abandoned for decades. Jiwoo said. Arya accepted the coordinates, and the ship seemed to fold in on itself, and reality bent and twisted, and Taemin felt like his atoms were being disassembled and reassembled in a different configuration, and he tasted colors and heard light, and then they were somewhere else, and the asteroid colony was gone, and the Hunter ships were gone, and they were floating in a glowing purple nebula that sparkled, with ice crystals and ancient debris. Slip drive successful. Current location is nebula designation SN447. Vren Hunter groups are scanning for our quantum signature, but the nebula's electromagnetic interference should mask our presence for approximately 6 hours. Taemin let out a breath he had not realized. He was holding, and his hands were shaking as he pulled them off the armrests, and Jiwoo was sitting on the floor with her back against a console looking like she might throw up. What did we just get into? She said quietly. I do not know. Taemin admitted, but Arya, you said I am some kind of custodian. You said my genetic pattern matches. What does that mean? It means, Taemin, that you are a direct descendant of Dr. Han Sol, who designed this vessel and the entire Ghost Fleet, and your genetics. The journey through slipspace took 3 days, and Taemin spent most of that time learning how to interface with the ship's neural command system, which felt less like piloting and more like having a conversation with something alive. And Arya explained that the Ghost Fleet ships were designed to bond with their pilots, to become extensions of human consciousness rather than just vehicles to be controlled, and Taemin was not sure he liked the idea of merging his mind with a machine, but every time he sat in the command chair he felt more comfortable, more natural, like the ship was teaching him how to think in new ways. Jiwoo had taken over the engineering bay and was knee-deep in systems analysis, pulling apart power conduits and scanning reactor components and muttering to herself about impossible energy. Readings and physics that should not work but clearly did work, because they were flying through folded space in a ship that was 200 years old but functioned better than anything built in the last decade. On the 3rd day, Arya announced. They were approaching the coordinates, and Taemin brought the ship out of slipspace into normal reality, and what appeared before them made his breath catch in his throat. because floating in the heart of a brilliant blue nebula was a structure so massive it defied comprehension, a station that must have been 30 kilometers across with docking bays that could hold hundreds of ships and construction frames that stretched out like the arms of some vast mechanical god reaching into the void. The Ghost Fleet facility designated Haven 7, Arya said, constructed in the final years of the war when humanity realized they needed weapons that could counter the Vren's numerical superiority. This station was designed to mass-produce Ghost Fleet vessels using automated construction systems that could adapt and improve each design iteration. The station looked dead, no lights except for the faint glow of emergency systems, no power, signatures except for a low-level hum that suggested something was still alive deep in its core, and Tae-min guided the ship toward a docking bay that opened automatically as they approached, and Ji-woo joined him on the bridge, wearing a pressure suit just in case. "This place gives me a very bad feeling," Ji-woo said. "Everything about this situation gives me a bad feeling." Tae-min replied. They docked and suited up and entered the station through an airlock that hissed open reluctantly like it had not moved in decades, and the interior was cold and dark, and their helmet lights cut through the darkness, revealing corridors lined with construction equipment and fabrication units and materials that should have degraded long ago, but looked pristine. Preserved in the vacuum area's voice came through their suit comms. "Life support systems are still functional in the central core. Recommend proceeding to that location, where you will find the command center and hopefully additional information about the Ghost Fleet program." They walked for what felt like hours through empty corridors and past viewing windows that showed construction bays filled with ships in various stages of completion. Some were just skeletal frames, while others looked nearly finished, and Tae-min counted at least 50 vessels before he stopped counting. Because the numbers were overwhelming, Ji-woo was examining everything with her engineer's eye, and she kept stopping to look at machinery and make notes on her suit computer. "Tae-min, this technology is at least a century ahead of anything I have ever seen, and it was built 200 years ago, which means humanity was capable of things back then that we have completely forgotten how to do. And that is terrifying." They reached the central core, and the doors opened to reveal a massive chamber with a functional atmosphere and actual gravity, which meant the reactor was still running after all this time. And as their suits registered breathable air, they removed their helmets and looked around at what appeared to be a command center combined with living quarters and research facilities. And then someone spoke from the shadows. About time, someone showed up. "I have been waiting here for 30 years wondering if anyone would ever activate the recall protocols." Tae-min and Ji-woo both jumped and reached for weapons they did not have, and a man stepped into the light, old but not frail, maybe 60 years, of age with gray hair and sharp eyes and a presence that suggested military training, and he was smiling, but it was the smile of someone who had seen too much and survived anyway. "My name is Kyung-soo, and I am the last guardian of Haven 7. And before, you ask? Yes, I knew your ancestor, Dr. Hansol. And yes, I have been living alone on this station for 3 decades waiting for someone with the genetic clearance to reactivate the Ghost Fleet." He said all of this without pausing for breath, like he had been practicing the speech for years. Tae-min found his voice. "You knew Dr. Hansol. You knew the person who designed these ships. I did not just know him, I served under him. I was a test pilot for the first Ghost Fleet prototypes, and I watched him create weapons that could reshape reality itself, and I also watched him realize what a terrible thing he had done," Kyung-soo said, and his smile faded. Ji-woo stepped forward. "What do you mean terrible? These ships saved humanity. Did they not? The history books say Earth won the war against the Vren. The history books lie," Kyung-soo said flatly. "Humanity did not win the war. We destroyed the Vren so completely that they begged for mercy, and then we destroyed ourselves because we were horrified by what we had become, and the Ghost Fleet was the reason. These ships do not just manipulate probability, they weaponize human consciousness itself. They take everything that makes us human, our creativity, our adaptability, our capacity for both mercy and ruthlessness, and they amplify it into a force that can rewrite reality. Tae-min felt cold. Arya told me these ships bond with their pilots. Bond is a gentle word for what happens. Kyung-soo said. When you fully integrate with a Ghost Fleet vessel, your consciousness expands to encompass the ship systems, and the ship systems expand to encompass your thoughts, and together you become something new, something more than human, and more than machine. And the power is intoxicating and terrible because you can do things that gods would envy. Then why did Earth decommission them? Ji-woo asked. Why hide this technology if it was so powerful? Kyung-soo walked to a console and pulled up holographic displays that showed battle footage, and Taemin watched in horror as Ghost Fleet ships tore through Vren armadas like they were paper, not destroying them quickly but deliberately, methodically making the enemy suffer because the human pilots had been fighting for so long that mercy had become a forgotten concept. We won the war, but we lost ourselves, Kyung-soo said quietly. The pilots who had bonded with their ships could not separate anymore. They had become too interconnected and their humanity was slipping away. And Dr. Hansol realized that he had created a weapon that would eventually consume its wielders and turn them into something monstrous. So he made a choice. He shut down the program. He scattered the ships. He erased the records, and he made sure his genetic descendants would be scattered across space with markers that would only activate under specific circumstances. What circumstances? Taemin asked. When the Vren returned. Kyung-soo said. Because Dr. Hansol knew they would. He knew the treaty we forced on them was just a pause, not an ending. And he knew that one day humanity would need the Ghost Fleet again, but he hoped that by then we would have learned enough wisdom to use it properly. A new voice interrupted, female, young, coming from another part of the command center. Unfortunately, wisdom is in short supply these days. A woman emerged from a research lab, maybe 30 years old, wearing a lab coat covered in equations and her hair tied back in a messy knot, and she looked at Taemin with eyes that seemed to see through him. I am So-min, and I am continuing Dr. Hansol's research, and before you ask, yes, I am also a descendant. We are all connected to him through various branches of his family tree that he carefully engineered to preserve specific genetic traits. Ji-woo looked between Kyung-soo and So-min. How many of you are there? Just us. 2 at this station, Kyung-soo said. But across human space there are probably hundreds of descendants. Most of them have no idea about their heritage, and the genetic markers lie dormant unless they come into contact with a Ghost Fleet vessel, which is exactly what happened when you activated that ship. Taemin sat down heavily in a nearby chair. My sister was murdered because she discovered something about the Vren. Aria told me that much, but she did not tell me what my sister found. So-min pulled up more displays. Your sister was a data analyst for Earth Security Services, and she noticed patterns in political appointments and military contracts and economic decisions that suggested someone was manipulating human governments from the inside. And when she dug deeper, she found evidence of Vren infiltrators, hybrids who could pass as human, and who had spent 2 centuries working their way into positions of power. Why? Taemin asked. Why would they do that? Because they are terrified. Kyung-soo said, the Vren remember what the Ghost Fleet did to them. They remember watching their fleets burn and their worlds shake. And they remember the treaty we forced on them, where they had to give up half their territory and submit to human oversight. And for 200 years, they have been quietly rebuilding and preparing for the day when they could strike back. But they needed to make sure the Ghost Fleet stayed buried, so they infiltrated human. Finding the first candidate took Taemin to a mining outpost on the edge of the Helix sector, where a man named Dong-hyun was supposedly hauling cargo between asteroids in a freighter that looked older than the war itself. And when Taemin finally tracked him down in a bar that smelled like recycled air in desperation, he found a man who was clearly drinking away his problems, and those problems looked substantial. Dong-hyun listened to Taemin's explanation with bloodshot eyes, and when Taemin finished talking about Ghost Fleet ships and the coming Vren invasion, and the need for pilots with specific genetic markers, Dong-hyun just laughed, the bitter kind of laugh that came from someone who had given up on the universe making sense. You want me to climb into a ship that will kill me in 3 years, so I can fight an alien invasion that nobody believes is coming, and you expect me to just say yes because we share some ancient scientist's DNA, Dong-hyun said and took another drink. I expect you to say yes because the alternative is watching billions of people die, including everyone you ever cared about, Taman said, and he was getting tired of this recruitment speech because he had given variations of it 3 times already, and none of the candidates had been easy to convince. I do not care about anyone anymore, Dong-hyun said. I lost my crew. I lost my ship. I lost everything that mattered when I made a stupid mistake and got people killed, and now I haul cargo alone and drink until I can forget their faces. Taemin sat down across from him. I know what it feels like to lose someone. My sister died because she tried to do the right thing, and I spent 3 years drowning in debt and regret and thinking I had failed her. But then I found out she was murdered, and suddenly all that guilt turned into purpose. Dong-hyun looked at him with eyes that were clearer than they had been a moment ago. They murdered her. The Vren murdered her because she discovered their infiltration, and they made it look like illness, and they bankrupted me to keep me desperate and powerless, and now I'm offering you a chance to hit back at the people who destroyed your life because I guarantee that whatever mistake you made, whatever got your crew killed, the Vren had a hand in it somewhere. Dong-hyun was silent for a long moment, and then he set down his glass. 3 years, you said? 3 to 5, depending on how much you use the ship's full capabilities. That is longer than I expected to live anyway, given how much I have been drinking, Dong-hyun said and stood up. Where is this ship? The second candidate was harder because young Mi was a corporate executive on a core world station, and she had money and power, and comfort, and convincing her to give all that up to climb into a warship and die fighting aliens she did not believe existed was like trying to convince water to flow uphill. She sat in her pristine office with its views of the planet below and listened to Taemin's speech with the kind of polite attention that rich people gave to things that did not concern them. And when he finished, she smiled the way you smile at a child telling an interesting story. That is quite a tale, but I think you have been misinformed about the Vren threat. Our intelligence services would have detected any major fleet movements, and I have seen no reports suggesting anything like what you are describing. Your intelligence services have been compromised, Taemin said bluntly. The Vren have spent 2 centuries infiltrating human government specifically to blind us to threats like this. That is a very convenient conspiracy theory. Young Mi said, convenient because it cannot be proven or disproven, and it gives you an excuse to ignore any evidence that contradicts your narrative. Jiwoo, who had come along for this recruitment, spoke up. We can prove it. Area has access to classified files from the original war, including communications logs that show Vren infiltration tactics, and if you give us access to your corporate intelligence network, we can show you the patterns. Young Mi considered this and then nodded. Fine. Show me. It took 2 hours of data analysis and cross-referencing and pattern matching, but eventually even young Mi could not deny what the numbers showed. Key positions in governments and corporations and military commands held by people whose backgrounds did not quite check out and whose decisions over decades had consistently weakened humanity's defensive capabilities. This is real, young Mi said quietly, and her confident executive demeanor cracked. They are really coming. In 4. Churs and Taemin confirmed, and we need every pilot we can get. Young Mi looked at her office and her comfortable life, and Taemin could see her doing the calculation in her head, weighing 3 years of life against letting billions die. I will do it, she said, but I want it on record that this is insane. The third candidate was in a prison colony, and getting him out required Taemin to do something he really did not want to do, which was break about 15 laws, including armed assault on a correctional facility. But Jae-sung had been convicted of a crime he did not commit after he discovered evidence of military corruption and tried to expose it. And the fact that he was still alive after 5 years in a place designed to kill troublesome prisoners suggested he was tougher than most. They extracted him in a midnight raid that involved Jiwoo hacking security systems while Taemin used the Ghost Fleet ships' weapons to disable the prison's defense grid, and Jae-sung walked out of his cell looking suspicious but willing to listen. You broke me out of prison to recruit me for a suicide mission, Jae-sung said after hearing the explanation. That is either the worst rescue or the worst prison sentence I have ever heard of. You can go back if you want, Taemin offered. No, Jae-sung said quickly. I am just making sure I understand the terms. We get 3 years of life fighting aliens in ships that can rewrite reality, and in exchange we save humanity from extinction. That is the deal. Sounds better than rotting in a cell waiting for someone to shank me. Jae-sung said. Where do I sign? Up. The fourth candidate was the hardest emotionally because Yoonji was only 19 years old, and she was a cadet at Earth's Naval Academy, and she had her whole life ahead of her, and Tae-min felt like a monster, asking her to throw it all away, but her genetic markers were some of the strongest Arya had detected, and they needed her. She listened to everything with the kind of serious intensity that young people have when they realize the world is not what they thought it was, and when Tae-min finished explaining, she asked the one question he had been dreading. Why me? Why not find someone older, someone who has already lived a full life? Because your genetic compatibility is 94%, which means you will bond with the ship faster and more completely than almost anyone else we have found, and in a battle where we are outnumbered 100 to 1, we need every advantage. Tae-min said honestly. Yoonji looked down at her hands. I joined the academy because I wanted to protect people, and I thought that meant serving on a regular ship in a regular fleet doing regular things, but I guess the universe had other plans. You do not have to do this, Jiwoo said gently. You are young, and you have time to live a normal life. If I say no, then everyone else will die anyway. Yoonji said, so it is. Not really a choice, is it? It is just me deciding whether I want to live 3 years as a hero, or 60 years as a coward who let billions die. Tae-min felt his heart break a little because she was right, and he hated that she was right. I am sorry, he said. Do not be sorry, Yoonji said, and her voice was steady. Just teach me how to use the ship. They gathered at Haven 7 Station. 9 pilots total, including Tae-min, and each one had their own story of loss and sacrifice and determination. And Kyung-soo looked at them with something that might have been pride or might have been grief or might have been both. You are the new Ghost Fleet, he said, and I wish I could tell you that this will be easy or that you will all survive, but I cannot lie to you. Some of you will die in the coming battle, and those who live will carry scars that never heal. But you will also accomplish something that most people never do. You will know with absolute certainty that your life meant something. So Min had prepared. The ships and each pilot was assigned a vessel based on their neural compatibility, and Tae-min watched as they each boarded for the first time, and felt the initial bonding process begin, and he remembered how it felt when Arya first connected, to his mind, that moment of expansion and terror and exhilaration. Jiwoo pulled him aside before the final preparations. I did the math, she said quietly. 9 ships against 5,000. Even with Ghost Fleet technology, the odds are not good. I know. We need a better strategy than just charging in and hoping the ship's reality manipulation is enough. What do you suggest? Jiwoo pulled up a tactical display. The Vren fleet is large, but it is also coordinated through a command network, and if we can identify their flagship and take it out early, the rest of the fleet will fall into chaos, and that gives us an opening. One problem, Tae-min said. We do not know which ship is their flagship. Arya might, Jiwoo said. She has intelligence files from the original war, and the Vren do not change their command structure easily. If we can identify their fleet commander, we can identify their flagship. They brought the idea to Arya, who confirmed that Vren fleet tactics had not changed significantly in 200 years, and that the flagship would be the largest dreadnought, in the formation positioned at the center of the fleet, protected by overlapping defensive screens. Daeho floated through the airlock and into Luna Station 7, with his helmet light cutting through the darkness like a knife through butter, and the silence hit him first, because space was always silent. But this was different, because this was the silence of a place that should have been alive with voices and machinery and the hum of human activity. But instead, there was nothing except the soft whisper of his own breathing inside his suit, and the occasional creak of metal expanding and contracting in the temperature shifts, and he had seen abandoned stations before during his 15 years as a salvage operator. But none of them felt quite like this one, because usually there were signs of panic or violence or at least hurried departure, but here everything looked like the colonists had just stepped out for a moment and would be back any second now. And that made his skin crawl under his thermal suit, because 300 people did not just vanish into the lunar dust. without leaving some kind of chaos behind them. And the distress beacon that had brought him here had been automated, and old, and probably malfunctioning. But salvage rights were salvage rights. And if he could claim this place before the big corporate scavengers arrived, he would be set for life with enough credits to retire to Mars or maybe even Earth, if he wanted to breathe real air again, instead of recycled station atmosphere that always tasted faintly of metal and plastic and other people's breath. And he pushed himself down the main corridor using the handholds because the gravity generators were offline, and everything was in 0G, which made movement slow, but also strangely peaceful, like swimming through a dream. And his light swept across walls covered in faded posters and work schedules and someone's birthday announcement from 15 years ago, when this place had still been alive. And he passed through the cafeteria where meal trays still sat on tables with food that had long since dried into unrecognizable shapes, and cups of coffee, frozen solid in the lunar cold. And it was like visiting a museum dedicated to ordinary life. Except museums did not make him feel like he was being watched by invisible eyes, and he shook off the feeling because fear was bad for business and he had work to do. And the first priority was finding the main computer core to download the station logs and figure out what had happened here, and maybe find something valuable in the process. And he made his way through the residential section, where personal quarters lined both sides of the corridor, and some doors were open, showing unmade beds and personal items floating in the zero gravity, like ghosts of the lives that had been lived here. And he saw children's toys and family photos and someone's collection of old books, actual paper books, which were rare and expensive. And he made a mental note to come back for those, because collectors paid good money for pre-digital literature. And then he found the administrator's office at the end of the corridor, and the door was locked. But his cutting torch made quick work of that, and inside he found what he was looking for, which was a personal terminal still running on backup power after all these years. And he plugged his datapad into the port and started downloading everything, while his eyes scanned the room and landed on a framed photo on the desk, showing a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, and a tired smile standing with what looked like her family back on Earth, and the nameplate on the desk read, Administrator Heejin Park. And he wondered what had happened to her, and whether she had made it off the station alive, or was floating somewhere in the dark between here and nowhere. And the download finished with a soft beep, and he disconnected his pad and started reading through the logs right there in her office, because he could not wait. And the first entries were routine and boring, just the usual administrative work and supply requisitions and personnel issues. But then, about 3 months before the evacuation, the tone changed, because the mining teams had discovered something in Crater Tycho 7, which was their deepest excavation site. And the geologists were excited because the readings did not match anything in their databases, and they kept drilling deeper and deeper until they broke through into something that should not have existed, which was a cavern, so massive that their scanners could not find the far walls. And Administrator Park had gone down to see it herself. And what she wrote after that visit made Daeho stop reading and look up from the screen, because her words were careful, but underneath them he could sense fear and wonder mixed together in a way that made his stomach tighten. And she wrote about something ancient and beautiful and terrible all at once, and how it sang to them in their dreams and called them with voices they could feel in their bones, and how the entire colony had heard it and been drawn to it like moths to a flame. And the last entry was dated the day before the evacuation, and all it said was, "We have to leave, because if we stay we will answer the call, and we are not ready for what that means." And there was nothing after that. Just silence and empty data logs, and Daeho sat back in the chair and stared at the screen for a long moment, trying to process what he had just read, because it sounded insane. But insane people did not evacuate entire colonies in an orderly fashion. And according to the manifests, everyone had gotten off safely and returned to Earth on emergency transport ships, and the station had been sealed and marked as contaminated, which was clearly a lie to keep people away. And he looked down at his pad where the station map showed the mining tunnels leading down into the lunar surface toward Crater Tycho 7, and he knew he should leave right now and file his salvage claim, and forget about ancient things that sang in dreams. But he also knew he was not going to do that, because curiosity was both his greatest asset and his worst flaw. And besides, what kind of salvage operator would he be if he did not at least look at whatever was down there? And he left the administrator's office and made his way to the mining section, which took almost an hour of careful movement through corridors and shafts that became progressively rougher and less finished as he descended, because these were working tunnels, not living spaces, and the walls here were bare rock and ice, and the lights were industrial and harsh when his suit computer managed to activate them, using power from his portable generator, and he passed equipment that had been abandoned in place and tool lockers still full of drills and cutting torches and safety gear, and he wondered how much the miners had been paid to walk away from all this expensive equipment without even stopping to pack it up, and the answer was probably not enough, because you could not pay someone enough to forget voices in their bones and dreams that called them to something unknown. And finally, after what felt like forever, but was only 90 minutes according to his suit chronometer, he reached the end of the tunnels where a massive blast door stood sealed with warning signs in multiple languages that all said the same thing, which was danger contamination, authorized personnel only. And he almost laughed, because there was no authorized personnel left, and he was definitely not authorized. But he was here, and that had to count for something. And he used his cutting torch again, and the door fell away, and beyond it was a shaft leading down into darkness. So deep that his helmet light could not find the bottom, and there were cables and a lift platform, but he did not trust 15-year-old equipment. So he used his suit thrusters to descend slowly into the black, with his light sweeping back and forth, across walls that stopped being lunar rock about 50 meters down and became something else, something smooth and metallic that seemed to absorb his light rather than reflect it. And strange symbols covered every surface, symbols that hurt to look at because they seemed to shift and move when he was not looking directly at them, and his suit sensors were going crazy with readings that made no sense, because they detected energy signatures and electromagnetic fields and gravitational anomalies that should not exist. And he kept descending, and the shaft opened up, and suddenly he was floating in a space so vast that his mind refused to accept the scale of it. And far below him, maybe a kilometer, maybe more, there was something that could only be a ship, except calling it a ship was like calling a mountain a rock, because technically accurate, but completely inadequate to describe the reality. And the vessel stretched away in all directions, impossibly huge and impossibly old and impossibly beautiful in a way that made his chest ache and his eyes water, and the same strange symbols covered its hull, glowing faintly with pale blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat, slow and steady and eternal. And he realized he was crying inside his helmet and did not know why. And he descended toward the ship, drawn by something he could not name and did not want to resist. And as he got closer, he could see details that made no sense, like surfaces that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions, and weapons ports that looked into depths that were not space and were not darkness but something else entirely. And there was an opening in the hull, a breach, or maybe a doorway. It was impossible to tell which, and he aimed for it, because where else would he go? And his boots touched metal for the first time in almost an hour, and magnetic locks engaged, and suddenly he had weight again, and he stood on the hull of something that might have been older than human civilization, and looked up at the cavern ceiling so far above and wondered what kind of beings had built this and where they were now, and whether they would mind that a human